My name is Madeline, and I'm 28 years old. Standing here in this hotel mirror adjusting my navy blue dress, I can barely recognize the woman staring back at me. 3 years ago, my family held a funeral for me. They told everyone I was dead, killed in a car accident that nearly took my life. But here I am, very much alive, about to walk into my sister Sarah's wedding uninvited. My hands are shaking as I touch the silk scarf covering the scar on my left cheek. Today they're going to see a ghost walk through those church doors. The question isn't whether I should go, it's whether I'm ready for what happens when my father sees me standing there. Before I tell you what happened when I walked into that church, let me know where you're watching from and hit that subscribe button. You won't believe how this story unfolds. 3 years ago, I was a different person living in a different world. Back then I was 25, living in my childhood home in small-town Oregon with my parents James and Patricia Miller and my younger sister Sarah. Dad was 52, a stern man who worked at the local bank, and Mom was 49, a homemaker who spent most of her time at the Baptist church, organizing events and gossiping with the other ladies. Sarah was 22 then, fresh out of college with a degree in elementary education. She had always been the golden child, the one who followed every rule, never questioned authority, and made our parents proud. Me, I was the troublemaker, the one who asked too many questions and dreamed of a life beyond our small-town boundaries. Everything changed when I met David Chen. He was a resident at the hospital in Portland, working long shifts, but always finding time to text me sweet messages throughout the day. David was brilliant, kind, and had this way of making me laugh even on my worst days. He was also Chinese American, and that's where the problems began. The first time I brought David home for dinner, the tension was so thick you could cut it with a knife. Dad barely spoke to him, asking pointed questions about his family background and making subtle comments about maintaining our traditions. Mom was polite but cold, the kind of politeness that feels like a slap in the face. After David left that night, all hell broke loose. Dad cornered me in the kitchen while Mom stood by the sink, arms crossed, shaking her head. "That boy isn't right for you, Madeline," Dad said, his voice low and threatening. "Our family has values, traditions. We don't mix with their kind." I felt my blood boiling. Their kind. You mean educated, successful, kind people. Don't get smart with me, young lady. You know what I mean. This family has a reputation to maintain in this community. Over the next few months, every conversation became a battle. David would pick me up for dates and I'd come home to interrogations. Where did we go? What did we talk about? When was I going to come to my senses and find a nice white boy from a good Christian family? Sarah tried to stay neutral at first. She'd pull me aside and whisper, "I think David seems really nice, Maddie. Don't let them get to you." But gradually the constant pressure from our parents wore her down. She started making excuses not to hang out when David came over. She'd leave the room when I talked about him. The final explosion came on a cold February evening. I had just gotten off the phone with David, who had proposed to me the night before. I was glowing, fingering the simple but beautiful engagement ring he'd given me when I decided to tell my family. "I have something to tell you all," I said, gathering everyone in the living room. Sarah was curled up on the couch grading papers Mom was knitting, and Dad was reading the newspaper. I took a deep breath and held up my hand. "David and I are engaged. We're going to get married next month at the courthouse in Portland." The newspaper crumpled in Dad's hands. Mom's knitting needles stopped clicking. Sarah looked up from her papers with wide eyes. "Absolutely not," Dad said, standing up so fast his chair rocked backward. "I will not allow it." "You can't stop me, Dad. I'm 25 years old. As long as you live under my roof, you'll follow my rules. And my rule is that you will not marry that man." Mom finally spoke up, her voice shaky. "Madeline, sweetheart, think about what you're doing. Think about your future children. Think about how this will look to everyone we know." "I am thinking about my future," I shot back. "I'm thinking about being happy with someone who loves and respects me." Sarah tried to intervene. "Maybe we could all just calm down and talk about this rationally." But Dad was beyond reason. His face was red, veins bulging in his neck. "There's nothing to discuss. She makes her choice right now," Him or us. She can't have both. The room fell silent except for the ticking of the grandfather clock in the corner. I looked around at the faces of the people I'd loved my whole life. My father stern and unforgiving. My mother tears streaming down her cheeks but nodding in agreement with her husband. And Sarah, my baby sister, looking torn apart but unable to speak up for me. Then I choose him, I whispered. Fine, Dad spat. Then you're no daughter of mine. Get out of my house and don't ever come back. I went upstairs, packed a single suitcase with my most important belongings, and walked out the front door. Sarah followed me to my car, crying. Maddie, please don't go. Maybe Dad will change his mind. No, he won't, I said, hugging her tight. But I'll always love you, Sarah. Always remember that. That was the last time I spoke to any of them for 3 years. David and I moved into a small apartment in Portland, and for 6 months we were blissfully happy. David worked long shifts at the hospital, and I freelanced as a graphic designer, slowly building up my client base. We'd wake up every morning and cook breakfast together, David teaching me how to make perfect scrambled eggs, and showing me how to fold dumplings the way his grandmother had taught him. We planned a simple wedding ceremony, just the two of us and a judge. David's parents had flown in from California to meet me, and they welcomed me with open arms. His mother, Mrs. Chen, spent an entire afternoon teaching me family recipes and showing me photos of David as a chubby little boy. It was everything I'd hoped my own family would be. I missed my family terribly, especially Sarah. I'd catch myself reaching for my phone to call her and share something funny that happened, or to ask her opinion about wedding dress styles. David tried calling my parents a few times, hoping to bridge the gap, but Dad would hang up as soon as he heard David's voice. Give them time, David would say, rubbing my shoulders when I'd cry about it. Sometimes love has to be patient. But time wasn't something I had. It was a Friday afternoon in late October. I'd just finished a client meeting downtown and was driving home through the rain. Oregon rain in October is relentless, turning the roads into slick, dangerous ribbons of asphalt. I remember singing along to the radio, excited to tell David about landing a big contract with a local restaurant chain. The truck came out of nowhere. I was stopped at a red light when I saw it in my rearview mirror, an enormous semi-truck barreling toward me, clearly unable to stop on the wet pavement. I had maybe 2 seconds to brace myself before impact. The next thing I remember is waking up in a hospital bed 3 weeks later, tubes in my arms and a bandage covering half my face. David was asleep in the chair beside my bed, his hand resting on mine. He looked like he'd aged 5 years, his face gaunt and stubbled, his clothes wrinkled. When he saw my eyes open, he started crying. "Thank God," he whispered. "Thank God you're okay." But I wasn't okay. The doctors explained that I'd suffered a severe concussion, some brain swelling, and would have permanent scarring on my left cheek where glass from the windshield had cut me. My left leg was broken in 2 places, and I'd need months of physical therapy to walk normally again. "Did you call my family?" I asked weakly. David's face fell. "I tried, Maddie. I called them the night of the accident." "What did they say?" He was quiet for a long time, holding my hand and looking at the floor. Finally, he met my eyes. "Your father said you made your choice. He said you were dead to them." The words hit me harder than the truck had. "He said what?" "I'm sorry, baby. I tried calling back. I tried explaining how serious it was, but they wouldn't listen. Your father just kept saying that they had no daughter named Madeline." I closed my eyes and tried to process this information. My own father had been told I was fighting for my life in a hospital, and his response was to deny my existence. The physical pain from my injuries was nothing compared to the emotional devastation of that moment. During my recovery, I tried reaching out myself. I called the house from my hospital room, but the line had been disconnected. I sent emails that bounced back. I even asked David to drive by the house to see if they still lived there, but the neighbors told him my parents had instructed everyone not to give out any information about the family to strangers asking questions. It was like I'd been erased from their lives completely. What I didn't know then was that my erasure was more complete than I could have imagined. 2 months after the accident, while I was still learning to walk again with a cane, David came home from work with a strange expression on his face. He sat down beside me on our couch and took my hands in his. "I ran into someone from your hometown today," he said carefully. "A nurse at the hospital mentioned she was from the same area when she saw your address on a form." "Oh, who was it?" "Her name was Jenny Morrison. She said she went to high school with you." I remembered Jenny. She'd been in my graduating class, not a close friend, but someone I'd known well enough to chat with in the hallways. "What did she say?" David was quiet for a moment. "Maddie, she offered her condolences." "For what?" "She said she was sorry for my loss. She said the whole town was shocked when they heard about your death in the car accident." The room started spinning. "My death. She said your family held a memorial service for you 2 months ago at the Baptist church. She said it was a beautiful service that your parents spoke about what a wonderful daughter you'd been before you lost your way." I felt like I was drowning. My own family hadn't just cut me out of their lives, they'd told the entire community I was dead. They'd held a funeral for me while I was lying in a hospital bed, fighting to recover from injuries that nearly killed me. David showed me the newspaper clipping Jenny had given him. There it was in black and white. Madeline Miller, 25, remembered at memorial service. The article described how I died tragically in a car accident survived by my loving parents and sister. It mentioned my volunteer work at the church and my artistic talents, painting me as a model daughter whose life had been cut short. There was no mention of David, no mention of our relationship, no acknowledgement of the life I'd actually been living. They'd rewritten my story, completely turning me into the daughter they wished I'd been, rather than the woman I actually was. The worst part was reading about Sarah's grief. The article quoted her as saying, "Maddie was the best big sister anyone could ask for. I'll miss her laugh and her advice every day for the rest of my life." Sarah really believed I was dead. She was mourning me, missing me, grieving for the sister she thought she'd lost forever. And it was all because our parents couldn't bear to admit they'd been wrong to cut me off. I spiraled into depression after that discovery. Not just because of the betrayal, but because of what it meant for Sarah. How could I contact her now? How could I tell her I was alive without destroying her faith in our parents? How could I force her to choose between the truth and the family that was all she had left? David held me while I cried for hours that night. "They don't deserve you," he whispered into my hair. They never did. But knowing that didn't make it hurt any less. David and I made the difficult decision to leave Oregon entirely. The memories were too painful, and we needed a fresh start somewhere nobody knew our story. We moved to Seattle, where David found a position at Swedish Medical Center, and I slowly rebuilt my freelance graphic design business. It took 2 years, but gradually, we created a beautiful life together. We had a small wedding ceremony in a garden overlooking Puget Sound with David's family and a few close friends we'd made in Seattle. Mrs. Chen cried during the ceremony, telling me afterward that she'd prayed every day for David to find someone who would love him as much as I clearly did. I threw myself into my work, channeling all my pain and energy into building something meaningful. My design studio, Cascade Creative, grew from a one-woman operation in our spare bedroom to a thriving business with 5 employees and clients throughout the Pacific Northwest. Success felt like the best revenge against the family who'd written me off as a failure. David was promoted to attending physician in the emergency department. We bought a charming craftsman house in the Queen Anne neighborhood with a garden where I could grow the flowers I'd loved since childhood. On weekends, we'd explore the city together, trying new restaurants and hiking the trails around Mount Rainier. But despite our happiness, there was always an empty space in my heart, shaped like Sarah. I thought about her every day. I wondered if she'd finished her teaching degree, if she'd found someone special, if she still wore the butterfly necklace I'd given her for her 18th birthday. Sometimes I'd drive past elementary schools and imagine her in a classroom reading stories to wide-eyed children the way she used to read to me when we were little. David and I had agreed not to try contacting my family. The wound was too deep, the betrayal too complete. But that didn't stop me from thinking about them, from missing the good memories we'd shared before everything fell apart. Then in February of last year, everything changed. I was scrolling through Instagram late one evening, a habit I'd developed to unwind after long days at the studio. I rarely used my real name on social media anymore, going by Madison Creek, instead of Madeline Miller. It was a small protection against my past finding me. That's when I saw it. A post from Sarah Miller, celebrating her engagement to someone named Marcus Thompson. My hands shook as I scrolled through the photos. There was my baby sister, radiant and beautiful, wearing a simple solitaire ring and beaming at the camera. She looked so much like Mom had at that age, but with Dad's stubborn chin and the same bright eyes I remembered from our childhood. The caption read, "He proposed on the beach where we had our first date. I can't wait to start this new chapter, though I wish my sister Madeline could be here to share it with me. She would have loved Marcus, and I know she's watching over us from heaven." I started crying and couldn't stop. David found me sobbing on the couch at midnight, still staring at the photos. "She's getting married," I managed to say through my tears. David sat beside me and pulled me into his arms. "I'm sorry, baby. I know this is hard." Over the next few days, I couldn't concentrate on anything else. I created a fake Instagram account and followed Sarah, scrolling back through months of posts I'd missed. She shared photos of her teaching job, her adventures with Marcus, and family gatherings with our parents. But scattered throughout were posts about missing me. On my birthday, 28 years ago today, my big sister was born. I still set aside a piece of cake for her every year. On the anniversary of my supposed death, 2 years without my Maddie, some days I still pick up my phone to call her. At Christmas, the hardest part about the holidays is the empty chair at the table. Sarah was living her life, but she was carrying the weight of my loss every single day. She'd grown up believing her sister was dead, mourning me while I was building a new life just a few hours away. The posts about the wedding kept coming. Sarah shared photos of dress shopping with Mom, planning sessions with Marcus, and excitement about their August ceremony. In every happy post, there was a shadow of sadness when she mentioned wishing I could be there. Marcus seemed like a genuinely good man. He was a teacher, too. Coached Little League baseball and clearly adored Sarah. In the photos, I could see how gently he looked at her, how he made her laugh. He was exactly the kind of man I would have picked for my sister if I'd been given the choice. But that was the problem. I hadn't been given any choice in Sarah's life for the past 3 years. The wedding announcement came in May, August 15th, 2:30 in the afternoon at St. Mary's Catholic Church in our hometown. Reception to follow at the Riverside Country Club. That night, David found me pacing around our kitchen at 2 in the morning. "I have to go," I said without preamble. "Go where?" "To Sarah's wedding. I have to be there." David set down the glass of water he'd come downstairs for and looked at me carefully. "Maddie, I understand why you want to, but think about what you're saying. Your parents told everyone you're dead. Your showing up at the wedding won't just affect them, it'll affect Sarah too. Sarah deserves to know I'm alive." "Yes, she does. But her wedding day isn't the right time for that revelation." We argued about it for weeks. David worried about my emotional well-being, about what kind of scene might unfold if I showed up uninvited. He worried that Sarah might blame me for staying away for so long, or that the shock might ruin her special day. But I couldn't let go of the idea. Sarah was starting a new chapter of her life, believing her sister was dead. She was carrying grief that didn't need to exist. Every happy moment was tinged with sadness for a loss that was based on a lie. "I won't make a scene," I promised David. "I'll sit in the back, let her see me, and leave quietly. She just needs to know. And what about your parents? They'll be there too. Let them explain to Sarah why they lied to her for 3 years." Finally, David stopped arguing and started supporting my decision. "If this is what you need to do for your own peace of mind, then I'll support you. But I'm coming with you." "No," I said firmly. "This is something I need to do alone." The morning of August 15th, I woke up in a hotel room in my hometown for the first time in over 3 years. I'd driven down from Seattle the day before, my stomach churning with nerves and anticipation. David had wanted to come despite my protests, but I'd convinced him to stay home. This confrontation needed to be mine alone. I stood in front of the hotel bathroom mirror, applying makeup to cover the faded but still visible scar on my left cheek. 3 years of healing had reduced it to a thin silver line, but in certain light you could still see where the glass had cut me. I wrapped a silk scarf around my neck, positioning it to casually cover the lower part of my face. I'd chosen my outfit carefully. A simple navy blue dress that was elegant, but not attention-grabbing nude heels that were comfortable enough to run in if necessary, and minimal jewelry. I wanted to look like I belonged there, but not like I was trying to upstage the bride. My hands shook as I applied lipstick. What was I doing? Was this the right thing, or was David correct that I should have found another way to contact Sarah first? But it was too late for second-guessing. I'd made my choice. The drive to St. Mary's Catholic Church took 15 minutes through streets I'd known my entire childhood. Nothing much had changed. The same small shops lined Main Street, the same families lived in the same houses, the same sense of everyone knowing everyone else's business permeated the air. I parked 3 blocks away from the church and walked slowly toward the sound of wedding bells. My heart was pounding so hard I was sure everyone could hear it. Cars were pulling up to the church entrance, guests in their Sunday best climbing the front steps with gift bags and cameras. I recognized several faces. Mrs. Henderson from the grocery store looking exactly the same but with grayer hair. The Johnsons from down the street arguing about something as they walked toward the entrance. Mr. Peterson, who'd taught both Sarah and me in Sunday school, moving slowly with a cane but still wearing the same kind of bow tie he'd favored 20 years ago. These people had attended my memorial service. They'd mourned my death, sent casseroles to my parents, probably shared memories of watching me grow up. Now I was about to walk past them like a ghost made flesh. I waited until the ceremony had started before approaching the church. Through the open doors, I could hear the organist playing traditional wedding music. I slipped inside and found a seat in the very last pew, partially hidden behind a pillar. The church was packed. It seemed like half the town had come to see Sarah Miller get married. I spotted the backs of my parents' heads in the front row. Dad's hair had gone completely gray and Mom had gotten thinner. They sat stiffly formally the way they always had in church. And then I saw Sarah. My baby sister looked absolutely radiant walking down the aisle in a classic white gown with delicate lace sleeves. Her hair was styled in an elegant updo with small white flowers tucked throughout. She carried a bouquet of white roses and baby's breath, the same flowers she'd loved since childhood. But even from the back of the church, I could see the sadness in her eyes. She was smiling, glowing with happiness, but there was a shadow there. The shadow of missing someone who should have been standing beside her as maid of honor. Marcus waited for her at the altar in a classic black tuxedo, his face full of such pure joy and love that it made my heart ache. This was what a wedding should look like. This was the kind of love I'd found with David. The kind of love my parents should have celebrated instead of destroyed. The ceremony proceeded traditionally. Father McKenna, who'd baptized both Sarah and me, spoke about love and commitment. Sarah and Marcus exchanged vows they'd written themselves, and when Sarah spoke, she said something that nearly broke my heart. "Marcus, you've helped me heal from losses I thought would break me forever. You've shown me that love doesn't end when someone leaves us, it just transforms into something that makes us stronger. I promise to love you with all my heart, including the pieces that will always belong to my sister Madeline, who I know is watching over us from heaven." I had to bite my lip to keep from crying out. She was dedicating part of her wedding vows to my memory, to the sister she thought she'd lost. The injustice of it overwhelmed me. When the ceremony concluded and the wedding party proceeded down the aisle, I ducked my head and let them pass. Sarah walked by just feet from where I sat, radiant and beautiful, with no idea that her supposedly dead sister was watching her most important moment. I should have left then. I should have slipped out of the church and driven back to Seattle, satisfied that I'd seen Sarah happy and safely married. But I couldn't do it. I followed the wedding party and guests to the Riverside Country Club, staying far enough back to avoid being noticed. The reception was being held in the main ballroom with large windows overlooking the golf course, where Sarah and I had learned to play as children. I positioned myself outside on the terrace, peering through the windows as the celebration began. Sarah and Marcus had their first dance to At Last, by Etta James, spinning slowly while guests watched and took photos. They looked so happy, so complete, except for that persistent shadow in Sarah's eyes. During the father-daughter dance, I watched Dad waltz with Sarah to Butterfly Kisses, the same song he'd danced with me to at my high school graduation party back when I was still his precious daughter, before I became his biggest disappointment. Sarah rested her head on his shoulder, and I could see her crying happy tears. The speeches began after dinner. Marcus's best man told funny stories about their college adventures. Mom gave a tearful speech about watching her baby girl grow into a beautiful woman. And then Sarah stood up to speak. "I want to thank everyone for being here today," she began, her voice clear and strong. "This day has been more perfect than I ever imagined, but I'd be lying if I said it was complete. There's someone missing who should be here, someone who would have been my maid of honor if things had been different." My heart stopped. My sister Madeline was the best big sister anyone could ask for. She taught me to be brave, to stand up for what I believed in, and to never settle for anything less than true love. She would have adored Marcus, probably would have threatened him if he ever hurt me, and definitely would have cried during the ceremony. The room was quiet, respectful as Sarah continued. "Before I toss my bouquet, I want to dedicate it to Maddie. Wherever you are, big sister, this is for you." Sarah turned toward the group of single women gathered on the dance floor, held up her bouquet of white roses, and said loudly enough for everyone to hear, "This is for my sister Madeline, wherever you are." That's when I knew I couldn't stay hidden any longer. I walked through the French doors into the ballroom, just as Sarah raised her arm to throw the bouquet. The motion froze halfway through as her eyes met mine across the crowded room. The bouquet slipped from her fingers and hit the floor with a soft thud. The entire room went silent. 200 people turned to see what had caught the bride's attention, and there I stood in the doorway like an apparition from the past. Sarah's hands flew to her mouth. "Maddie," she whispered, but in the complete silence of the room, everyone heard it. That's when Dad saw me. His face went white as a sheet, then red with rage. He stood up so fast his chair fell backward, pointing at me with a shaking finger. "Why are you still alive?" he shouted, his voice cracking with shock and fury. "You're supposed to be dead!" The ballroom erupted in chaos. Mom screamed and collapsed back into her chair, hyperventilating. Sarah pushed through the crowd, running toward me in her wedding dress. Marcus followed close behind, confused but protective. Guests started whispering frantically, trying to understand what was happening. "You're alive," Sarah sobbed as she threw her arms around me. "Oh my God, you're alive." I held her tight, breathing in the familiar scent of her perfume mixed with wedding flowers. She felt so small in my arms, just like when we were children and she'd run to me after a nightmare. "I'm sorry," I whispered in her ear. "I'm so sorry I wasn't here." "I thought you were dead," she cried. "I grieved for you for 3 years." Over Sarah's shoulder I could see my parents' faces. Dad looked like he was about to have a stroke, his face purple with rage and shock. Mom was crying hysterically, being fanned by Aunt Margaret, who was staring at me like she'd seen a ghost, which in a way she had. "Get out," Dad yelled, pushing through the crowd toward us. "Get out of here right now." "James, stop it," Aunt Margaret snapped, standing up to face her brother-in-law. "Can't you see what you've done?" Sarah pulled back from our embrace, mascara streaked down her cheeks, and whirled to face our parents. "What is he talking about? Why did he say she was supposed to be dead?" The room was completely silent now except for Mom's sobbing. Every eye was on our family drama playing out in the middle of Sarah's wedding reception. Dad's mouth opened and closed like a fish out of water. For the first time in my life, James Miller was speechless. I stepped forward, my voice steady despite my shaking hands. "Because they told everyone I died in a car accident 3 years ago. They held a funeral for me while I was lying in a hospital bed recovering from injuries that nearly killed me." Gasps rippled through the crowd. Sarah's face went from confusion to horror to fury in the space of seconds. "What?" she whispered. "I was in a car accident." I continued, speaking directly to Sarah, but loud enough for everyone to hear. "A truck hit me at a red light. I was in the hospital for months. David called them to tell them what happened, and Dad told him I was dead to them, so they decided to make it official." "That's not true," Dad sputtered, but his voice lacked conviction. "Then why did you just ask me why I'm still alive?" I shot back. "Why did you tell my husband that you had no daughter named Madeline?" Sarah turned to stare at our parents, her white dress stark against her flushed face. "Mom. Dad. Is this true? Mom couldn't speak through her tears, but Aunt Margaret stood up slowly. Patricia, she said quietly, tell her the truth. We thought she was as good as dead anyway, Mom finally whispered. She chose that man over her family. She was already dead to us. The words hung in the air like poison. Several guests got up and left immediately, clearly disgusted by what they were hearing. Others sat frozen, witnessing the destruction of a family in real time. Sarah's face was a mask of disbelief and betrayal. You let me grieve for 3 years. You let me cry at her gravesite that doesn't even have a body in it. You watched me suffer thinking my sister was dead when she was alive this whole time. Sarah, sweetie, you don't understand. Dad tried to approach her, but she stepped backward. I understand perfectly, Sarah said, her teacher voice cutting through the chaos with authority. You were so proud and stubborn that you'd rather have a dead daughter than admit you were wrong about her choice in marriage. She turned to face the room full of guests, many of whom were family friends who'd known us since childhood. How many of you knew? She demanded. How many of you knew my sister was alive? The silence was deafening. Marcus finally stepped forward, placing a gentle hand on Sarah's shoulder. Maybe we should take this somewhere private, he suggested softly. No, Sarah said firmly. They made this public when they held a fake funeral. They made this public when they lied to an entire community. She looked back at me, tears streaming down her face. Where have you been? What happened to you? I live in Seattle now, I said. I'm married to David. I have a business, a good life. I've wanted to contact you every single day for 3 years, but how do you tell someone their parents lied about your death? You should have found a way, Sarah whispered. You're right. I should have. I was afraid, and I was hurt, and I made the wrong choice. But I'm here now. Dad finally found his voice again. You're ruining everything. This is Sarah's wedding day, and you're ruining it. I turned to face him for the first time, really looking at the man who'd raised me and then disowned me. He looked older, smaller somehow, diminished by his own choices. I didn't ruin anything, I said calmly. You did. 3 years ago, when you decided your pride was more important than your daughter's life. We did what we thought was best for this family. You did what was easiest for your reputation in this small-minded town. You couldn't bear to admit that your daughter found love with someone who didn't fit your narrow worldview, so you erased her completely. Sarah was staring back and forth between us, processing everything she was hearing. Marcus had his arms around her, whispering something in her ear, probably trying to calm her down. Sarah, I said, turning to my sister, I know this is the worst possible timing. I know I should have found another way. But I couldn't let you start your married life believing your sister was dead. You deserve the truth. Sarah wiped her eyes with the back of her hand, smearing her makeup further. I need to sit down. Marcus guided her to a chair, while the crowd of guests watched in fascinated horror. Some people were taking photos with their phones, and I realized this disaster would be all over social media within hours. Aunt Margaret approached me cautiously. Madeline, is it really you? Hi, Aunt Margaret. She pulled me into a fierce hug. I never believed you were dead, she whispered. Your parents' story never made sense. I've been praying for 3 years that you'd come home. I'm sorry I didn't contact you directly. Don't apologize, honey. I understand why you couldn't. She pulled back and looked at my parents with disgust. Patricia, James, you should be ashamed of yourselves. More family members began approaching me, offering hugs and apologies. Uncle Robert, my dad's brother, looked like he wanted to punch his own sibling. Cousin Jenny was crying, saying she'd missed me at her own wedding last year because she thought I was dead. But through it all, my eyes kept returning to Sarah. She sat in her wedding dress, surrounded by the ruins of what should have been the happiest day of her life, trying to process the fact that everything she'd believed about her family for 3 years was a lie. Finally, she stood up and walked over to me. The entire room held its breath. I'm glad you're alive, she said simply. And I'm glad you're here. But I need time to process this. I understand. She turned to face our parents, her voice steady but cold. I want you to leave. Both of you. Get out of my wedding reception. Sarah, you can't be serious, Mom pleaded. I'm completely serious. You've been lying to me for 3 years. You let me grieve for a sister who was alive and probably missing me just as much as I missed her. You don't get to be part of this celebration." Dad stepped forward, his face red with indignation. "This is ridiculous. She's the one who abandoned this family." "No," Sarah said firmly. "She made a choice to marry someone she loved. You made a choice to disown her for it. Those aren't the same thing." She looked around the room at all the guests who were still staring at our family drama. "I'm sorry everyone had to witness this. Please stay and enjoy the party. Marcus and I are going to step outside for some air." As Sarah and Marcus headed toward the terrace, she paused next to me. "Are you staying in town tonight?" "Yes, at the Hampton Inn." "I'll call you tomorrow. We have a lot to talk about." "Sarah, I'm so sorry this happened on your wedding day." She managed a small smile. "At least now I know why I felt like something was missing. It wasn't grief I was carrying around. It was hope." The aftermath of Sarah's wedding was swift and decisive. Within hours, news of my resurrection had spread through our small town like wildfire. Social media posts showed photos of the confrontation, and by the next morning the story had been picked up by local news outlets. Sarah called me at 8 a.m., her voice tired but determined. "Can you meet me for coffee? Just the two of us." We met at the same diner where we used to get pancakes after church when we were children. Sarah looked exhausted, still wearing her hair in yesterday's wedding style, but dressed in jeans and a sweater. She'd clearly been crying. "I didn't sleep at all last night," she said as we settled into a corner booth. "Neither did I." Marcus was incredible. He held me while I cried and didn't ask any questions until I was ready to talk. Then he listened to everything I told him about our family and said he understood why I needed to see you today. "He seems like a good man." "He is." Sarah stirred sugar into her coffee with shaking hands. "Maddie, I need you to tell me everything. Where have you been? Are you really married? Are you happy?" So I told her. I told her about David, about the accident, about our parents' refusal to acknowledge my existence. I told her about building a life in Seattle, about my business, about the happiness I'd found despite the pain of losing my family. Sarah listened without interrupting, occasionally wiping away tears. When I finished, she was quiet for a long time. "I can't believe they let me suffer like that," she finally said. "I used to visit your grave every month. I'd bring flowers and talk to you about everything that was happening in my life. I told you about Marcus, about getting engaged, about planning the wedding. I felt so guilty that you weren't there to share it with me." "I'm sorry, Sarah. I should have found a way to contact you sooner." "No, don't apologize. I understand why you couldn't. If someone told me my sister was dead and then I found out she was alive, I wouldn't know how to handle that either." She reached across the table and took my hands. "Tell me about David. I want to know everything about the man my sister married." I pulled out my phone and showed her photos. David at our wedding, David cooking in our kitchen, David and me hiking in the mountains. Sarah smiled at each picture, especially the ones where David was clearly making me laugh. "He looks at you the way Marcus looks at me," she said, "like you're the most important thing in his world. He is the most important thing in mine. I want to meet him. He wanted to come with me yesterday, but I thought it would be better if I came alone." "You were probably right. Yesterday was chaotic enough." Sarah paused, then asked the question I'd been dreading. "What happens now? With Mom and Dad, I mean." I sighed. "I don't know. They made their choice 3 years ago, and they've had multiple opportunities to make different choices since then. Yesterday, Dad's first reaction to seeing me wasn't relief or joy, or even anger at being caught in a lie. It was shock that I was still alive. That tells me everything I need to know about where I stand with them. They're going to want to make amends now that everyone knows the truth. Are they just going to be embarrassed that their lie was exposed publicly?" Sarah was quiet, considering this. "You're right. Dad was more concerned about the scene at my wedding than he was about seeing you alive." We talked for 3 hours, filling in the gaps of 3 lost years. Sarah told me about finishing her education degree, about meeting Marcus at a teacher's conference, about the small apartment they'd rented, and their plans to buy a house. She showed me photos on her phone of her classroom, her students, the life she'd built while mourning a sister who wasn't actually dead. When we finally left the diner, Sarah hugged me tightly. I'm taking a few days off for my honeymoon, but when I get back, I want you to bring David down for a visit. I want to get to know my brother-in-law. Are you sure this is all a lot to process? I'm sure. I've spent 3 years missing my sister. I'm not wasting any more time. As I drove back to Seattle, I felt lighter than I had in years. Sarah and I would be okay. We'd need time to rebuild our relationship to work through the complicated emotions of our separation, but the foundation was still there. The love between us had survived our parents' lies. 2 weeks later, David and I drove down to Portland to have dinner with Sarah and Marcus. It was awkward at first, 3 years of separation not easily bridged in one evening. But David and Marcus hit it off immediately, bonding over their shared love of baseball and their mutual devotion to their wives. By the end of the night, we were making plans for them to visit Seattle for a weekend. The rest of our extended family reached out one by one. Aunt Margaret apologized repeatedly for not questioning my parents' story more aggressively. Uncle Robert confessed he'd always suspected something wasn't right, but hadn't known how to investigate. Cousins, family, friends, even former neighbors called to express their shock and to tell me they'd missed me. But my parents remained silent. 3 months after Sarah's wedding, she called me with news. Mom and Dad want to see you. What did you tell them? I told them that was between you and them. But Maddie, I think you should know that things haven't been good for them since the wedding. A lot of people in town are treating them differently now that they know the truth. That's not my problem to solve, Sarah. I know. I'm just telling you so you understand their motivation if they do reach out. A week later, I received a letter from my mother. Not an email, not a phone call, but an actual handwritten letter mailed to my business address in Seattle. Dear Madeline, it began. We know we made mistakes. We were hurt and angry, and we reacted poorly. We'd like to talk to you about making things right. The letter was brief, formal, and notably lacking in any real apology or acknowledgement of the specific harm they'd caused. There was no mention of the fake funeral, no recognition of the pain they'd inflicted on Sarah, no acceptance of responsibility for their choices. I showed the letter to David, who read it and shook his head. This isn't an apology. This is damage control. I agreed. I wrote back a brief response. I'm glad you recognize that mistakes were made. When you're ready to take responsibility for the specific choices you made and the harm they caused, we can have a conversation. Until then, I wish you well. I never heard from them again. 6 months after the wedding, Sarah called with more family news. She and Marcus had bought a house in Portland closer to Seattle. She'd also made a decision about our parents. I've cut off contact with them, she said simply. Sarah, you don't have to do that for me. I'm not doing it for you. I'm doing it for me. I can't trust people who would lie to me about something so fundamental. And I can't respect people who would put their pride above their children's well-being. Sarah and I now talk every week, sometimes more. She and Marcus came to Seattle for Christmas, and we cooked dinner together while David and Marcus watched football and argued about statistics. It felt like the family dinners I'd dreamed of having, the kind where love was more important than appearances. I've started therapy to work through the complex emotions of the past 3 years. Grief for the family. I thought I had anger at the time that was stolen from Sarah and me, and surprisingly, relief that I no longer have to carry the weight of trying to earn my parents' approval. My business continues to thrive. David was recently promoted to Chief of Emergency Medicine. We're talking about starting a family of our own, creating the kind of home where children are loved for who they are, not who their parents want them to be. Sometimes I wonder what would have happened if I hadn't gone to Sarah's wedding that day. Would my parents have eventually told her the truth? Would Sarah and I have found each other another way? Would they have taken their lie to their graves, letting Sarah mourn a sister who was alive and missing her just as much? I'll never know. But I do know this: the moment I walked into that church, I stopped being the daughter who died in their minds and became the woman who chose to live on her own terms. That day at Sarah's wedding, my father asked why I was still alive. The truth is, I wasn't really alive until that moment. Because that's when I finally stopped letting their choices define my worth. I learned that family isn't just blood. It's who shows up for you when it matters. It's who celebrates your joys and holds you through your sorrows. It's who loves you for who you are, not who they want you to be. Some wounds never fully heal, but they can transform into wisdom. The scar on my face reminds me every day that I survived something that was meant to destroy me. And the scars on my heart remind me that love, real love, doesn't come with conditions. My parents chose pride over their daughter. I chose love over their approval. And in the end, love won. What would you have done in my situation? Would you have stayed away to avoid causing pain? Or would you have fought for the truth to be known? Let me know in the comments below. And don't forget to hit that like button if this story resonated with you. Subscribe for more real-life stories that remind us all that sometimes the most powerful thing we can do is choose ourselves. Share this video with someone who needs to hear that their worth isn't determined by other people's inability to see their value. Thank you for listening to my story, and remember that wherever you are in your own journey, you deserve to be surrounded by people who celebrate your authentic self. Until next time, keep choosing love over fear and truth over comfort.